I just finished doing a video on the EduQuest, which will probably be out before this one. And while I was shooting it, this thing arrived. And this thing is, I know basically what it is. It is still a very odd object, and I don't know, how deep the rabbit hole will go with it. I'm guessing it won't be all that involved. So I was gonna do a mail call video for my patrons like I normally do, and I realized by the time I was done even sussing out what the thing was, I would pretty much have made all the content I was going to make about it. So I'm just gonna go for it and do it once. Let me open this thing up. They packed it really well. Jeez Louise. Good Lord, they packed this well. So what we have here is a Mormon Meeting House webcast communicator. This, as far as I can tell, is a bespoke piece of equipment made just for the Mormon Church. And this thing's purpose is just to get their individual meeting house, is what they call, it's sort of equivalent to a church. I don't know a whole lot about the Mormon faith. I've done a little bit of reading to try and figure it out. It doesn't seem like it quite lines up with what I'm familiar with. So a meeting house is seems like it's sort of like a church. They also have a thing called a temple, which is, I guess, for much more serious purposes. But I guess the place where they typically meet on a weekly basis to have services is called a meeting house. Of course, they do other stuff there, just like pretty much every other type of church in existence. And I don't know whether these things are used for streaming services to the public or what. I don't really know what the use case is. The interesting thing about this is, if I read long enough, I could probably find out, because all of their internal documentation on how to use this stuff, how to set it up, how it's intended to be used, is available to the public. It's not like, they're not like emailing PDFs around or anything. It's just, there's like a wiki.
Now you will take another composite RCA cable. Run it from one of the video out connectors on the video distribution amplifier to the video in connector number 1 on the Meeting House webcast communicator.
You could just go to this knowledge base and you can read all about how, I guess, all the meeting houses are set up, because it sounds like they're extremely consistent. I mean, this sort of object here represents kind of a McDonald's mass production approach that is just totally unheard of in the only church I'm familiar with, which is the Catholic Church. I'm not Catholic, but I was raised that way. And, those churches are completely, not a single one is similar to any other, and there's an entire industry serving the video market in churches of all faiths. If you go to the websites for Panasonic, for Sony, for Canon, everybody who's making video gear has a section that's dedicated to worship as a market. This is like a huge chunk of the low-end pro market for AV. So this thing is not really shocking in its existence, but what's interesting about it, to me, is that it's a PC. It's not a bespoke piece of equipment. It's not like an integrated device. It's a PC with what appears to be the most trimmed down ITX board I've ever seen. It doesn't have PS2. It doesn't have anything other than VGA, USB, network, and audio. That's it. And then they appear to have packed in a quad head, or at least triple head, composite video capture card. And I'm really curious what that's going to be, because I get the impression that they really go for like a high standard of performance with everything they do in these setups. It sounds like they want to set them up once and then never touch them again. In fact, I was reading some documentation on there where they're talking about the AV system having a mixer that is automatically controlled and completely locked out, so that none of the staff of the meeting house actually have access to it. So I wouldn't be surprised if for this purpose they had picked something with a video capture card that was of very high quality, which of course, given my predilections, that could actually be useful to me. It's also just a really compact system because there's no internal power supply. This would appear to be using a Pico PSU or something similar, because it just takes 12 volts, 5 amps right there. And I should have a power supply that can do that. But I'm curious whether they used a Pico PSU or some other brand. It also, on the side, has a label from, I think, the eBay seller that says it's an IOCorp, and then says Pro Edge thin client. Well, I looked it up, and IOCorp is a company that makes thin clients of all sorts. So I wouldn't, oh, well, there we go. ProEdge Thin Client. Apparently, this is a company that just makes stuff like this. Maybe this is not bespoke for the Mormon Church. I don't know. Until proven otherwise, I have to assume this is not completely unique. But at the same time, it very much seems like it could be. And I'm kind of curious whether I'll be able to make it do anything, or if it's completely customized and like locked down to the point where I won't be able to use it for any sort of general purpose. So the first thing I'm going to do is open this thing up and see what it's got, and then I'll see if I can power it up and get it to do anything. One more thing before I go into this, someone's going to ask me, why are there stickers over these two holes? A bunch of people that I've shown this to have asked me already. The answer is, I would think, pretty obvious. It's so you don't plug into those two holes. This device is not supposed to emit any sound, which is what the green hole does. That's the headphone jack. And it's not supposed to receive any unamplified sound, which is the mic jack here. It's supposed to receive only line in, so they've covered up the other two holes so you don't plug into the wrong one. I've seen this done on a lot of desktop PCs, you know, just your basic low-end consumer machines. They plug everything other than the headphone jack because most people don't plug in an analog microphone, and they don't plug in like a tape recorder or something, so they don't have a need for the other jacks. And these are just stickers. You can peel them off if you want. All right, so let's open this thing up and see what it is. This is interesting. Somebody's tried to get into this before and messed up the head of the screw in the process. And that's odd because the warranty sticker is unbroken. So either someone started taking it apart and then changed their mind, or they used a heat gun to get this warranty sticker off. All right, it's about what you'd expect in almost every regard. There's a couple odd things. All right, so first off, that's definitely a Pico PSU. Yep, it says Pico PSU on it. If you're not familiar, normally an ATX power supply is like this great big monster that's like, honestly, almost the size of this whole computer and heavier to boot. But that's basically because it's taking 110 volts and converting it to all these different currents. And also it does a tremendous amount of amperage. If you already have a clean 12 volts entering the device and you don't need a ton of power, you don't need something as big as an ATX power supply. And it actually becomes possible to make the ATX supply this big. This guy here is a Pico PSU. It's just a couple of voltage regulators and honestly not a whole lot else. And it just takes your plus 12 volts that's coming in from your external power supply, and it produces, 5, minus 5, plus or minus 12, 3.3, whatever you need to run a motherboard. These are pretty pricey, but they're super handy because they let you make something this small. What's funny about this is the board actually has a 24-pin connector, but this is only a 20-pin Pico PSU, and it's just leaving the other set of pins empty there, which I guess I didn't quite know you could do. It's a mystery what CPU this is. I guess I could pop that, but let me look up this board and find out what it takes. It's an Intel desktop board, and I'm seeing a sticker down here. It says CPU-D510MO. Let me look that up first. So this is a 2010 era Intel desktop board. It looks like, I believe that is a soldered on chip because it says socket is BGA, so I'm pretty sure it's a soldered on CPU there. Has an Intel NM10 Express chipset, takes DDR2, so this is going to be like Core 2 era. Only has one PCI slot, no PCIe. Only USB 2, it's got some SATA ports. So we can probably find out what CPU it is by just powering it up since it has a video output, so I'll give that a shot in a bit. We've got a 2 gig stick of DDR2 in here. It's got an empty, now is that M2? That's probably mini PCI given the era. I'm not very good at telling the difference between all the various mini ports, M2, mini PCI Express, etc. But I think given the length and its position, I'm going to assume that's mini PCI. It says mini PCIe right there. If I used my eyes, I'd know this. It's funny actually, this board only has a mini PCI slot, but the mini slot is PCIe. So you could actually put a more modern something in here if you really wanted to. So let's get at this video capture card here. The first thing I notice, it's interesting that I hadn't quite realized. I had assumed that these ports here were like attached to the chassis somehow, and that there were wires going to wherever the actual capture card was. But now I look at it, it's, it makes perfect sense. This is just the PCI slot, the one PCI slot on the motherboard. But because they know exactly what card's going to go in there, they've just cut the holes for that exact card in the chassis. So although this is a generic motherboard that could go in any ITX case, you can't put any other type of card in this particular one, which makes perfect sense, but is still very strange to look at. This is a normal PC case, but you can't put anything other than this specific machine in it. Oh, and then storage is through this little tiny like SATA SSD. I don't know if general purpose, like normal type SSDs were around yet. This one is probably just chosen because it plugs into the SATA port directly. So that's convenient because they don't have to mount an actual like 2.5-inch SSD anywhere here. And then it's got this little tiny power cable that loops all the way up here and around and goes into this Molex connector. So yeah, all Jelly Bean parts it looks like. The card itself has a Connexent, however you pronounce that name, Fusion 878A. That sounds like the Brooktree part number, right? Yeah, Brooktree 878. That was sort of the high-end capture card for standard def back in like 2004. So is this like a second sourced 878? Okay, that's what happened. Per linuxtv.org, Brooktree got acquired by Connexent, who then rebranded it to the Fusion BT878. And eventually they took out the BT entirely. So yeah, this is just a Brooktree 878. It just has a whole bunch of inputs. I guess that's what I'm really curious about. Can this thing do simultaneous 3-channel capture? Or even 4-channel? Because I didn't think the Brooktree chips did that, but maybe in some sort of really high-end configuration, they could do multiple channels at once. Yeah, there's nothing on the Linux video page about it saying that you can do multi-channel capture, so I'm really curious if you can just select between these in software what the deal is. Anyway, other than that, this thing appears to be extremely basic. I guess I'm not surprised, but all the parts are just Jelly Bean parts. It's got a Crystal Fonts LCD in the front, might be the most interesting thing about it. Otherwise, everything looks like it's just super basic. I wasn't really expecting anything different, although I was kind of hoping this would be some sort of custom card. So I'm going to put this back together and turn it on and try and get a notion of what its specifications are. Oh, and you know what? They could have used a 2.5-inch SSD, I believe, because there's your mount points right there. So here's a funny thing. I went to my box of power supplies to find something I thought would run this, and I found a 12 at 5. Great. And when I went to plug it in, I discovered this had a locking collar on it that like screws on, and sure enough, it screws in to this device. Every DC barrel jack in existence should use this type of connector. It's been available for eons, but you only see it on like one device in a million. It's criminal. You know, I just plugged this in, and I'm kind of surprised, given the fail-safe design of it, that it doesn't automatically power on when power is applied. Let's see if it powers on when you press the button. Yeah, it seems to work. There we go. So copyright 2010, so that's about when this thing is from. It automatically logged in on boot, which is not surprising. For a moment, I had thought, oh, what if it has a password? And I realized if it had a password, that someone might forget the password. And since the whole idea here is the thing is supposed to be usable by people who don't know what they're doing with technology, then it wouldn't make sense for it to not work if somebody forgot a goddamn password. Password management is the #1 loss of productivity in every single business that exists, I swear to God. I don't have any statistics for this, but it's got to be up there. All right, so what's going on here? There's a program running down here in a console that's just titled Do Not Close, and it's just trying to look up instream.lds.org constantly. So I'm guessing this is the thing that launches the program that starts a stream as soon as you turn the thing on. Let's go investigate that. In the programs, we've got Adobe Flash Media Live Encoder, and then Windows Media Encoder. Wow, I've never actually seen that installed on anything. Here's our Do Not Close. Ah, okay. So this is actually a custom rolled exe called LDS encoder. Let's look at the registry that comes with it. Out of courtesy, I'm gonna blur out the username and password here, but suffice to say, they did not use very good security practices with this product. Oh, this is funny. So they've got two files here called beginning and ending, and if you look at them, this is the opening XML header and all the appropriate tags for presumably a Windows Media Encoder broadcast. And then the other one here, ending, is everything that comes after whatever the actual body of the request is. So rather than embed these as strings inside of their program, they've just put them as .dat files in the folder. That's something I would do with a cheesy Python script, I suppose. All these other XML files in this directory are just various presets. I'm guessing you can choose from one of these before you start a stream. And then I guess this guy here must just be all the magic. I guess I could give this to someone to see if they could tear it apart, but I'm guessing it's just going to be a program that connects to a server and uses the Windows Media Encoder API to send a video stream there. Presumably that's where pretty much the whole meat of the thing is. Otherwise, this is just a completely bare bones XP install with a driver, and that's it. Yeah, this comes up as an Osprey 2XO video card. I saw mention of that capture card in the LDS documentation. This Osprey thing, if that is what this card is, I guess I don't have a reason to think it isn't, seems to be like a really advanced take on standard def capture cards, where it's designed to be able to do stuff like it can spit out multiple different output streams from one input. So if you're capturing video with it, you can have it process that video in different ways and present, I guess, multiple output streams. I don't know if those become separate video for Windows endpoints or what, but it sounds like a really interesting card. I'm guessing that's how they're able to do the multiple inputs, is that this thing has been lightly customized so the drivers are capable of switching between those composite input jacks. But there's no mention here of it being able to capture multiple streams at once. So I'm guessing you can only use one at a time. Oh yeah, sure enough, I can use Windows Media Encoder to set up a capture session here. And if I select this, it's an Osprey 100 apparently. And then if we go to configure, we can pick between any of the 4 inputs. I don't remember if this was universal for the Brooktree chips, but this thing can apparently do every analog video format. This seems a lot more flexible than any other Brooktree capture card that I used. I mean, I recognize some of these settings, but some of the other ones are pretty wild, like a black and white composite camera. Never seen that before. All this is completely new. I don't know what any of this stuff does. Simulstream. Oh, this would appear to be that thing that lets you stream multiple video outputs from one capture card. This would have been really useful prior to the current era where we've got other ways to do that. Back in like 2009, this was virtually impossible. Built-in cropping and resizing. You can have it automatically impose a logo. I guess you can have it. Oh, it'll detect NTSC embedded closed captions and render them. You can even tell it which test pattern you want when there's no video input. Wow. Yep, sure enough, there we go. It generates color bars. Well, let's give it some input. Wow, from here at least, the video quality looks outstanding. I mean, I'm using a really, really high quality input as well, but it's certainly not skimping on the composite capture. This looks terrific. I guess it makes sense. Like I said, they would have wanted really good quality so they could get consistency, because the whole idea with having the same equipment at every single location is for that equipment to never be the problem, right? You want the gear that's going to always do what everyone expects and not need to be like tinkered with and maintained. So if this thing is the best composite capture you could get readily, then it makes sense they would have used it. That said, now I'm wondering what the control panel on the front does. Interesting. So whatever these options are, they're not available from anything running on the computer itself. I'm guessing that these talk directly to whatever that do not close program was. So I'm going to assume that you wouldn't need to touch anything on the computer under normal circumstances, that you probably are supposed to be able to do everything from here. That's a part of why the install is so bare bones. So for instance, if we go to setup, let's see, do we have the ability to like change the video input? Well, you can adjust the input volume. That's intriguing. I wonder what that's actually doing under the hood. Like, I wonder if it's changing the volume in Windows. Yeah, I can't tell. None of the Windows audio sliders seem to be moving. Whoa. I hit OK here, and all of a sudden, it's shutting the computer down. That's intriguing. I wonder why it did that. And now we're starting back up. By the way, it turns out this is an Atom D510 1.6 gigahertz. All right, so I've been through the rest of the software on here. I verified that the front panel here is being driven by that do not close program. So once I close it, it doesn't do anything anymore. The only stuff that's in here is a create webcast, test internet, shutdown, and under setup, you can change a unit ID or change the volume or update the software from USB, and that's it. That's the whole device, which isn't surprising. I mean, the whole thing is intended to be a plug-and-play solution. I didn't expect there to be much depth to it, but it was also the possibility that I would open it up and it would just be an incredible, just endless cavern of fascinating decisions and architectural concepts. But no, we rolled the low number. Rolled maybe like a 2. It wasn't a crit fail, but it wasn't great. There were 2 other interesting things I was going to mention. The first is that the software, the LDS_encoder, which appears to be the heart of the entire thing, is made by IO Corporation, which would seem to be the people who made the unit itself. I guess that sort of makes sense, but at the same time, the idea of a company that makes custom thin clients and also does professional services for the software for their intended purpose is kind of wild. That seems like a fresh one to me, but my experience with businesses that are operating in like the small to medium business category is they'll do anything for money, no matter how far out of their skill set it is. So if the LDS church showed up and said, hey, we want to buy like 5,500 of these from you, and we want you to make custom software so we don't have to go through another company, I think they would have had a huge internal fight. They would have fired like 3 developers who put their foot down and said, no, I won't have anything to do with this. And then they did it anyway, and probably did a terrible job. Nothing against IO Corporation, but every time a company does a pivot like that, they screw it up. The one other thing is the hard drive actually has 2 partitions. It's got about a 1 gig that's got the primary XP install on it, and then it has a little 4 meg partition called DOS. And if you look inside of there, it's got mostly just a bare bones DOS install, fdisk format, just enough to boot. But then it also has what appears to be a DOS network stack. It's got a few files here that appear to be packet drivers, and then it's got device, DOS agent, protman, and then net and netbind, which I'm pretty sure are things that I remember from like Microsoft LAN Manager. I don't know why this would have that. On a machine of this era, there's no built-in method to boot to 2 different partitions, really. I'm sure that the Crystal Fonts LCD on the front can't possibly have anything to do with it, because all it does is send like serial signals that can be picked up by a program running under Windows. Like I said, if you close that LDS streamer application, the LCD panel stops working. So I'm positive you can't use that to boot into this mode. Otherwise, I might think this was associated with like doing a software upgrade, because it does have an option for that. So I have no idea what that does or why it's on here. So that's it. Seems to be a pretty ordinary machine, just a thin client made by some company that does thin clients. It's got off-the-shelf parts in it. It's got one little blob of custom software on there that we can't get into to look at, but the function looks pretty clear to me. The video capture card in there is a little better than most, but not much to write home about, so yeah, I don't know what to do with this thing. I spent like 40 bucks on this just to find out what it is, and now I know what it is. So if you're one of my patrons and you're wondering if I'm spending your money in a sensible way, no, I'm not.